So the Biden administration decided to put in place a new eviction moratorium yesterday, I believe. And first of all, it's even worse than the one before that, the one that was in place under the Trump administration. So there's that. There's a lot of criticism to be had around that. And even during the one under Trump, that wasn't perfect. That shit was, it was loosely enforced and it was means tested, and you had to prove that you had lost income specifically because of COVID and all these other things that created these giant loopholes where a bunch of people were being evicted still during a pandemic. So the ban that was in place before was not some type of benchmark for success. It was shitty. It was horrible. And now Joe Biden, after he initially let the ban expire, and I did a video on that, he came up with a new one under pressure. And this one, it covers 90% of the country, allegedly. And I find it very funny that people are taking the Biden administration at their word when they say, oh, it's going to cover 90% of the country, as if Joe Biden isn't a brazen fucking liar and he hasn't lied about every single policy position that he's come out and stated publicly. So I don't believe him when he says it's going to be 90% protection. Even the last ban, which they would say was 100% coverage, 100% protection, it wasn't. And a bunch of people were still being evicted. Record numbers of people were being evicted. If you saw the video of the police officer with CNN was following him around with the camera, and he was evicting people, and he said that we would normally do like 2-3 times this amount of evictions in a month, the amount of evictions that they were now doing in a week during the pandemic. So record numbers of people have been being evicted during this entire crisis and during this entire ban. So now Joe Biden says it's 90% coverage for the country. I don't believe him. But even still, it's bizarre to me that people are just willing to accept that. Because that means 10% of the country, 10% of the renters facing, or people behind a mortgage facing eviction, they're just out on their own and they're going to have to figure it out by themselves, and they have absolutely no type of protection. And I think that's gross. I don't think anybody should be evicted, period, ever, but definitely not during a pandemic. But I'll break down my thoughts on the shitty new eviction moratorium. But first, let me mention what led to this, which was this whole photo op that Cori Bush and some of the Justice Democrats are doing out on the steps of Congress. And there's a lot of nuance to be had here, because a lot of people, if you watch the show, you know I've been saying that these so-called elected progressives, but they're a bunch of neoliberals, all these Justice Democrats, Bernie Sanders, if they were serious about a political revolution, if they were serious about challenging power and fighting for left policies, then they would be calling for direct action, and they would be mobilizing their supporters to publicly pressure politicians to do their job if they were serious about it. So now they do this whole photo op where Cori Bush slept on the steps of the Capitol, and they had some of their fans come out and join them. So they do that. You can technically classify that as a direct action. But I think all the people who will try to say, oh, why don't you take yes for an answer? They're doing the direct action. They're fighting for something. I think a lot of the people doing that are being obtuse on purpose and leaving out a lot of the relevant context. Like an analogy would be like, imagine if you were hungry and starving and somebody came up to you like, oh, do you want something to eat? You say, yeah. And then they give you a shit sandwich. And then you spend 5 minutes critiquing that shit sandwich and telling them why you're not going to eat a shit sandwich. And then they go and tell you, why don't you just take yes for an answer? You're so ungrateful, and this is what you asked for, whatever. Yeah, I asked for something to eat, but I didn't ask for a shit sandwich. And similarly with this direct action, it was shitty. They folded for an even less than they were asking for, and what they were asking for was pathetic to begin with, because all they were asking was to keep kicking the can down the road and extend the eviction moratorium for another 60 days. So they got less than their shitty ask, and they declared victory. And then on top of that, this was so haphazard and so off the cuff. It wasn't planned at all, and there was no effort into it at all. And again, this is not nitpicking. This isn't me just like, oh, wagging my finger from across the country doing nothing. It made a difference because they knew that about the eviction moratorium. They knew that tens of millions of people in this country were facing eviction for over a year, and they knew the time was going to come where that rent needed to be canceled, that debt needed to be canceled, or else tens of millions of people will be thrown out into the streets. They've known about this for over a year. And instead of actually organizing and mobilizing a national campaign, they waited until the day where everybody in Congress already left for a 7-week vacation and they weren't coming back. And that's just when they decided to make a stink of this after, again, the eviction moratorium had expired. So you waited all this time and you did absolutely nothing before then. And then you did this. And here's why it makes a difference. Because had they planned it, had they been organizing for months as they should have been, had they been applying public pressure, the turnout would have been massive. We saw what happened with March for Medicare for All. There was way more turnout for March for Medicare for All than with this little thing that they threw together last minute. So had they planned it, there would have been much more pressure and the demands could have been higher. The demand should have been higher anyway. But you would have had a lot more pressure to get what you wanted. But they didn't. And the turnout was minimal for people who have tens of millions of followers. And they had about 100 people at the Capitol. So all of that is worth critiquing. And then, of course, what they asked for was pathetic. So tens of millions of people are going to be thrown out in the street. Currently, there's maybe 1 million homeless people in this country. What is going to happen, because the Democrats are so corrupt, because Joe Biden is so corrupt, that they're taking money from BlackRock, they're taking money from the financial institutions that invest in real estate. They're taking money from the real estate developers. And now they're going to do the bidding of their donors who will profit from mass evictions. So they're going to do mass evictions. And because of that, tens of millions of people are going to be thrown onto the streets. That is unconscionable. That is untenable for any type of functioning society. And so if these Justice Democrats really cared about this housing issue, then why not ask for the rent and the mortgage to be canceled? Joe Biden has the ability to do that. The Congress has the ability to do that. So pressure them to do the only option that's on the table, really, because all these extensions of the eviction moratorium, they're just, one, they're kicking the can down the road, and two, they're allowing all these stealthy evictions, these covert evictions to be happening under the guise where people think that there's an actual ban on evictions. So there's not as much pushback as there should be. So the only real solution here is to cancel the debt, because there's no way in hell that over 5 million households who are months behind, have months of back rent or months of mortgage owed, there's no way that they're going to be able to pay that back even if they start working again. So the only way to avoid an unprecedented homelessness crisis is if the government gets involved and cancels the debt. So why that wasn't the ask from the Justice Democrats is beyond me, and that is a worthy criticism and questions to be asked of them. So what they were asking for didn't even solve the problem. And then what they settled for was even less than that. What they settled for was even less than Trump did to stop evictions during a pandemic. Make that make sense for me. And they're celebrating this. They're celebrating this. They were literally playing music as they went home on vacation after the Biden administration announced a shitty eviction moratorium, where 90% allegedly 90% of the country would be, or 90% of renters and more people who own homes facing eviction would be protected. Again, that is horseshit. You are, and in accepting that, you are also accepting that hundreds of thousands of people, if not over 1 million people, will be evicted. You're just accepting that, and you're not going to do anything to stop that. And somebody made a great point on Twitter, and I was thinking about this too. So again, like the 90%, so the 10%, they can just go fuck themselves and they can go kick rocks, right? And when you do the numbers, when you do the math, okay, 10% of the 5.5 million people who are going to be evicted, that's about 500,000 households. 500,000 households are going to be evicted under this. If the eviction moratorium is held up exactly how the Biden administration says it will be, which I know it won't, then 500,000 households will be evicted. And if you compare that to the amount of people that are estimated to be evicted, people in the households, there are about 15 million people going to be evicted. So 10% of 15 million, that's 1.5 million. Like I said earlier, there's about 1 million homeless people in the country right now. So Biden, because of his donors, under pressure from his donors, and the Democrats all in alignment because they have complete control of government, they've decided that it is a good thing that they're about to double the homeless population in this country, more than double the homeless population in this country. And everybody's celebrating this because the alternative was that the Democrats were going to increase the current homeless population by tenfold by just completely opening the floodgates with no type of ban or anything at all. And people are celebrating this. Honestly, when I see this shit, it makes me want to, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to fix this because on top of that, there's a whole other thing to be discussed, which I'll do in a separate video. The people who were there were like standing these politicians. They were like defending these politicians, and they were there cheerleading these politicians. Politicians who've left us for dead. So again, I'll do an entirely separate video on that because they were actually shitting on journalists asking tough questions of politicians who left us for dead in an emergency. And the people in the crowd, regular people who have been left for dead by these politicians, were out there defending them from tough questions from journalists. It was really bizarre to me. This whole thing is bizarre. And again, so people are celebrating the fact that instead of the homeless population being increased tenfold, it'll only be doubled from its current state, which also is an unprecedented homelessness crisis at the hands of the Biden administration. So, I mean, the bar is, to say it's so fucking low is the understatement of the year. And this ban is not solving any problems. It is, for 60 days, they're going to continue to kick the can down the road. People will continue to be evicted, and the months of back rent will continue to pile up. And again, we're kicking the can down the road because at some point, either the debt is going to come due and these people are going to be evicted, or the government is going to have to intervene and cancel it. And nobody in the government is talking about canceling it, which it looks to me like they're just going to keep trying to evict as many people as possible and hope that nobody really pushes back on them and calls for the rent and mortgage to be canceled. And the fact that these Justice Democrats were celebrating this shit is honestly disgusting. And they were doing it because I don't think they were talking it up, bigging it up like it was some giant win. They literally said, oh, they moved mountains. They moved fucking mountains. Millions of people are going to be evicted still, and they're talking about they moved mountains. So they were talking it up because honestly, they knew the optics, and they played all the music and did the whole celebration as they were leaving as they were going on vacation, and we're still in the housing crisis. And by the way, the housing crisis isn't just about the evictions, because right now, currently, there's been a historic increase in rent over the last year. And the rent is out of control everywhere across the country. In some places like Orlando, Florida, the rent increased like 20% from last year. That is unheard of. People's income didn't increase 20%, but the rent has. So there's an entire housing crisis going on in this country. And again, all these politicians are on fucking vacation. Another 7-week vacation in the middle of a fucking emergency. And the Justice Democrats who did this little photo op, they know that this is still an emergency. They know we're still in the housing crisis, but they don't give a fuck either. Or because they could build on this momentum and they could, like I said, demand solutions to the actual fucking problem. But they don't want to do it. They don't care enough to do it. They did all of this for a fucking photo op, which is why as soon as they left, Cori Bush sent out a fucking text message to the people who number she has on her list or whatever, and trying to fundraise off the fact that they had that little sleepover at the Capitol. Oh, we did all this great thing. We prevented millions of people from getting evicted. Now give us money. You didn't prevent millions of people from being evicted. You kicked the can down the road. And now you're going on vacation just like all the other shitty politicians in the country for 7 weeks while the country continues to burn, while people continue to be evicted. And like to me, it's apparent that this was just a big ass photo op to make them look good, make them look like they're fighting, make them look like they're not as shitty as the rest of the politicians. But this was weak sauce, to say the least. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Let me know if you think I'm being an asshole, I'm being too cynical, I'm being too critical.